kids. So if you have any testing needs, do talk to Kim Bohan. So I need to ask you this question. This is sort of an idea of what's to come. Lita Hollingworth is magic. And I want to know if there was anybody in this room who had to be here today who was drawn to this session and you don't know why. Was there? Okay, we're having lunch. Anybody who has heard the call right after this, we're having lunch. And if during this session you get, oh, I have got to get involved, you have to have lunch with us because this woman has totally changed my life, completely inspired me. Have any of you ever read anything I've written? I used to think I had original ideas. I really did. I thought I was so proud of myself, and then I picked up one of her books and decided I didn't have an original idea. Everything I thought of, she thought of first. So if my writing has inspired you, her writing will inspire you even more. And you will be doing yourself a favor, an unforgettable favor, if you read the original. What I'm going to be sharing with you today is some primary source material for any of you who are graduate students or researchers or historians. This is video that has never been seen before. It was uncovered, I don't know where it was buried, but she had an estate of her husband. Hi. No problem. It's good to see you. Her husband married their housekeeper after she died. She only lived to be 53 years old. And the housekeeper's daughter must have passed away, Virginia Florence, and somehow after the first eBay stuff was sold, they came across some other material. And John Wasserman bought it on eBay. Kathy Carney told him, I can't afford this, and he bought it instantly. And then, while I was putting the slideshow together, these video clips were sent to me. That's not an accident, folks. That's the kind of thing she does all the time. And once you get to hear the rest of the stuff she does. But I'm going to do a straight presentation, sort of, and tell you about this absolute giant. And I'll share more in the keynote address. But I was asked by Kim Johnson to talk about Lita Hollingworth and the highly gifted. And she probably asked me to do that simply because I had a huge list of abstracts and she couldn't decide, and that looked like two things she could put together. I didn't realize until I started reading again that she is the voice of the highly gifted, and that this is exactly a perfect match. So I know Kim isn't here, but if any of you see her in the hall, you gotta thank her for me putting these two together. So, highly gifted. I'd like to share a poem with you of a highly gifted person. And as soon as I know how to work this. Okay. Here. On. That always helps. Lone Pine. I think you'll agree that this was written by a highly gifted person. High up on the peak of the hilltop, where the tempests meet in strife, through the night and the storm and the darkness, it stands like a lonesome life, beaten and scarred and crippled by the winds and rain made old, while the pine trees down in the valley are sheltered from storm and cold. From a barren rock on the summit of the hill it lifts its form, a light to the warm spring sunshine and the fury of the storm, silent and uncomplaining except when the sad winds moan, through its broken and battered branches, the tale of a life alone. High up where the world may see it, sharp outlined against the sky, while its brothers down in the valley, unnoticed, are all passed by. And the lone pine standing patient, where the wild winds wage their strife, beaten and scarred and crippled like a broken, lonely life, is telling again the story as the wind through its branches moan of a soul lifted high o'er its brothers that must bear the storm alone.
How old was the author, Linda?
What do you think? Do you think this is the poem of a highly gifted person?
Yes.
Okay. How old do you think the author was?
15.
Okay. And what did you get out of it? What did this poem speak to you? What did it say about the person who wrote it?
They have empathy. They feel.
Very good. What else? Anybody get something different?
We didn't do it. Oh, I said they have empathy and that they feel deeply.
I think they're very strong, but they're lonely.
Very strong and lonely.
Telling about him herself.
Pardon?
Telling about him or herself.
Telling about him or herself. You got that one right. This was written at age 14 to a familiar landmark in Valentine, and it was printed in the Valentine local paper. And Lita was lonely at 14, and she had been battered very badly by a wicked stepmother. And this was a poem about herself. And Louis Terman, after she died, declared that this is some of the best juvenilia poetry that he had ever seen. So it's about Lita, and it's about her roots. In an article that she wrote, it was called Homecoming, in the Lincoln Star and Journal. You're in Lincoln?
Yes.
Okay, is it still around?
Yeah,
Star
but,
and Journal?
yeah, they changed their name. It's the-
What's it called now?
Just Lincoln Journal.
Just
They
Lincoln
dropped
Journal.
the star, which I thought was a mistake, but that's fine.
So she wrote this 2 years before she died. And she said, I was the first white child born in Dawes County in a dugout on the homestead of my grandfather on White River. Her mother died when she was 3 years old, and giving birth to her youngest sister. There were 3 girls. Johnny Stetter wanted a boy, and he was very disappointed that she was a girl. He didn't show up and see her until she was about 8 or 9 days old. And she was precocious from the get-go. And her mother said to her husband, who was never around, who was like an errant minstrel, kind of wanderer guy, I wouldn't trade her for 1,000 boys. And so the father was talked into marrying the proverbial wicked witch of the West, and who hated these girls. And from the time they were little, forced them to do everything, went into rages, screamed at them, hurt them. And the one who really took care of Lita and raised her before he got married again was her grandmother. Her grandmother, Margaret Danley, was her soul partner. And when the stepmother came into the picture, she would not allow Lita to even wave or acknowledge her grandmother across the street. The grandmother and grandfather would watch her go to school, and she had to put her head down and not look at them. Not a very nice lady. So she endured physical and emotional abuse. She was responsible for taking care of her younger sisters. And her only refuge, what enabled Lita to become what she became, was school. The one-room school in Valentine. Did any of you ever go to a one-room school? And did any of you from Chagrin, Valentine, that White River, Dawson, around that area? Okay. Dawes, not Dawson, sorry. So she adored her teacher, and the teacher allowed her that resilience to survive this. She said that, I think his name was Dr. Watson, kept me alive for my faith in higher things. this is a calligraphy that hangs on my wall in my office. Lita has been my continuous inspiration, and I'm praying that by the end of this conference, every single person who hears me talk about her becomes so in love with her that you have to find out more, that you have to commit yourself to helping her get into the Nebraska Hall of Fame. We've tried twice. Tried in 1988. We had a commemorative conference for her in 1989 that was unbelievable. Tim, Burke, unbelievable. A peak experience that we remember the rest of their lives. And we tried again last year. A very worthy person was able to do it, but we have 5 years to get together to do it again. This time, we're going to do it. And all of you need to help me. The only reason I am here at this conference is to do this presentation. And those of you who chose this over something else that would help you figure out what to do in the classroom on Monday are here for a reason. And if you don't know it now, sometime you'll be tapped on the shoulder and you'll say, oh, it wasn't an accident that I came. This is one of the 2 calligraphies that I have on my wall. As for me, I think I could care above all things to have life absorbed by human beings, just to give as much as I have to people. I believe that they are as willing and eager to absorb one's life as lawns are, or kettles, or hats. I conceive of it as terrible to die at the end of the world on one's deathbed and look back upon rows and rows of shining kettles, or good investments, or medicine bottles emptied in the interests of one's health. She wrote that at age 20. I have that sinking feeling when I think of it. Such things seem to me so pitifully futile, but there is more comfort in the thought of life being absorbed by life again. So I should prefer to give what I have to human beings, since given somewhere, we all must. So who is Lita Hollingworth? That slide originally said, who was Lita Hollingworth? But as I was putting it together, I realized is much more appropriate. Born several miles from Chadron in an earthen dugout on May 25th, 1886, she became the founder and matriarch of our field. How many of you have heard of Lewis Terman? Okay, he is the one who is often considered the founder because he created the Stanford Binet intelligence scale, which was used to identify them, and he did a study of 1,586 gifted kids that's still going on, and so everybody knows about Terman, but very few people realize that she independently was working on the other side of the country. Terman and Hollingworth never met, but she is truly the foremother. And how many of you work with gifted kids? There's no reason why anybody in Nebraska working with the gifted wouldn't know about her, except that we've neglected a jewel that came from your own soil. It's time to rediscover her and to have your students rediscover her. She's Nebraska's gift to gifted education. She wrote the first textbook. She taught the first course. She was the first counselor. She developed child-centered therapy, which plays a massive role later in life. Emotional education. She conducted 30 amazing studies that are still considered among the finest studies that were ever conducted on the gifted. How many of you have heard of talent searches? That's Lita to thank for that. It was her idea. She did it first, and Julian Stanley took the idea from her. Above-level testing. She created the first programs for the highly gifted, and in addition to all that, she was the scientific board of the women's movement, and she came up with something I'm going to share with you called the woman question. question, but I'll leave that as a surprise. So Lita Hollingworth is our foremother, not only of gifted education, but of what I care about the most, the psychology of giftedness. She invented the psychology of giftedness. And I'm a psychologist, and I consider my work just a continuation of hers. She taught the first course on nature and needs of the gifted at Columbia University Teachers College in 1922, and she formally initiated the field with her textbook, the very first textbook. She gifted children, their nature and nurture. She should be known to everyone who works with the gifted throughout the world, and we would like her to be known to every Nebraskan by putting her in the Hall of Fame. She belongs there. This is what she wrote. My main professional interest, this is in that same homecoming letter, my main professional interest is directed toward research into the nature and needs of highly gifted children. Little is known at present as to how they should be educated. I refer to those rarely occurring children who test at the very top of the intelligence scale. So, where does she fit? Have any of you had foundations of education? So if you're teachers, you probably did have this course. How many of you are teachers? How many of you are parents? A lot of the same hands went up. Is quintillion a name you've ever come across? You've heard that name. What about Comenius? That's somebody who studied it all? How about John Locke? Is that a familiar name? Rousseau. We're getting closer to familiarity here. Pestalozzi, anybody study him? And Froebel. These are the giants, the founders, who looked at children and decided how to educate them based on who they were, not on what we thought we should impart to them. Children first, child-centered torchbearers. The next one in this list, Maria Montessori. How many of you are familiar with her? Do you know the journal Gifted Child Quarterly? It's a very famous journal in this field, and Michael Piofsky and Barry Grant wrote an article that this is drawn from called Child-Centered Torchbearers. And Lita Hollingworth is next, and the next one is Anna Marie Roper. Have any of you learned about Anna Marie? Of course, Noreen was a good friend. There is a new commemorative thing that just came out, Noreen, that Lisa has, that you're going to, you must stand up and take it to her.
Oh, it's very good. It's keeping in touch. It's commemoration for her life. Huh?
She passed away in May, and I have a picture with her and Noreen that's in my office. And so you've got to see this. It is divine. So Anna Marie and Lita Hollingworth had a great deal in common. They believed many of the same things, and their commitment to children, to really understanding and knowing the hearts of children, it's like they had one heart. So here is in this article her purpose of education: to assist gifted children's sensory, intellectual, emotional, and aesthetic development at appropriate mental level and pace of instruction. And this is the role of the teacher: to act as a facilitator of learning and emotional growth, to assist with the problems arising out of the disparities between mental and chronological age. Have any of you heard of asynchronous development? Thank Lita. It was her idea first. And you can see it right there. The problems arising out of the disparities between mental and chronological age. Where did the idea come from? Like everything else, from her. But this is golden. And this, if you have to write something down, this is the one thing I would want you to write. Just this one slide. Her philosophy. A great believer in the importance of opportunity in society. She was not a hereditarian, like everybody before her. She believed that maybe what what you can do depends on what you were born with. But what you actually do depends on opportunity and support and education. The role of the teacher, the role of the parent, the role of the community, like the school. And she loved our little schoolhouses, I'll tell you that. She believed that you aren't gifted just because you were born that way. It's what opportunity you're given in society. And Pat Johnson, I met at this wonderful commemorative conference that we had in 1989. She was Lita Hollingworth's niece's daughter. She is Lita Hollingworth's niece's daughter. Lita did not have children, but Pat said that this is what her mother had told her about her Aunt Lita. She was fascinated with the minds of gifted children. She sought to understand each child's personal experience. She prized the individual. She believed that life was precious, talent was a blessing to be nurtured and shared for the good of others, and that people were to be cherished and helped. The other thing that came out in that poem when she was 14, all her life. This is information that was dug out that no one has ever seen. We're the first people to see it. And this is her in the classroom working with a child. Well, that didn't work, did it? Okay, try again. Okay. Let me see if I can do this. I've never done a video in a tape before. Ah, it's working. How exciting. Watch her with this child and tell me what you see. Wasn't that gorgeous? What did it do for you? What did you see about this woman just watching that little snippet? Nobody else in the world existed, and that's what they said about Anne Marie too, that she really, really listened and respected children.
I just noticed the planes, the child was sitting higher.
I didn't notice that. That is gorgeous. Thank you for pointing that out. But you're right. That says a great deal, especially when you think about, do you have any picture about what education was like in the first 30 or 40 years of the last century? Children wouldn't sit above a teacher because that would be disrespectful. The teacher was always above the child, and I missed it completely. I never saw it. What else did you see?
I thought it was really interesting how you could tell she was really, really listening, but not looking at the person as much, but really thinking about what they were saying. So able to think, like, you could tell, I mean, they still felt listened to, you could tell. But they weren't, you get a lot of times we'll say, you need to look at the person so we know that we're listening to each other, but she was really thinking.
That's something else I didn't pick up. That's delicious. Thank you. I will use that too. Because when we're testing a child, when Kim or myself or someone else at my center, some of these kids can't be looked at directly. And when they're thinking, you know, Bobby Gilman, our associate director, will sometimes pretend she's very busy doing something so the child can think without feeling like, okay, you've thought long enough. So I didn't even realize that that was probably something she realized and was doing on purpose. I didn't even think about that. What else did you see? Yeah.
I saw the change in the child as he leaned in.
That I saw. I noticed that he came to her like this. That was exciting when I saw that. Kathy?
She was whispering at some point and did this, like she was thoughtful.
Yes.
Okay, this is going to take some explaining. It's a conversation being had between a child and the adult or the teacher, you know, and as teacher, there's kind of a way you perceive that relationship or whatever. And to me, it just appeared that there was no age.
Yes,
There was,
yes,
you know,
yes.
as
It was
just,
equality,
yeah, they were on the same
same plane, respectful.
Yeah.
Now, when I tell you what the role was that she was playing in that classroom, you'll be even more shocked at that. She was not their regular classroom teacher. She was a university professor and a psychologist who had an office, a laboratory at the school. She created the program, and she came in only to teach biography. And they knew, every one of those kids knew that this was an extremely famous person who came and just taught them one subject. So it's even more remarkable. It's not just the teacher-student relationship, but it was the relationship with someone who they knew created that school for them. And when she died, they discontinued the school. So I want to share with you what kind of a giant we've got here. Her husband, Harry Hollingworth, was a giant in his own right. He started the field of industrial psychology. And his mentor was James McKean Cattell. Is that a name that rings a bell for anybody, Cattell? He was very, very, very famous. And the Coca-Cola company was in danger. They were being sued. And they came to James McKean Cattell and asked if he would do a study to prove that something that they put in Coca-Cola wasn't going to hurt people's health. And he didn't take it on. He gave the job to, or he offered, let's say, that study to Harry. And Harry had Lita actually do the study. That was her first foray into research. It was a magnificently executed study. That's where the money came from for her to go to college, from that Coca-Cola study. What was the ingredient in Coca-Cola that Coke was being sued over?
Cocaine.
No.
No?
Oh, somebody said it.
Caffeine?
It was caffeine.
Oh, funny.
Back here.
Yes, you are absolutely right. There was cocaine in Coca-Cola in those years. That was what the lawsuit was about. It was about caffeine. How's that? And they made enough money for Lisa to be able to go to college. So thank you, Coca-Cola. She was the first clinical psychologist in the civil service in the city of New York. She was the second female instructor of educational psychology at Columbia University Teachers College, all guys. She developed psychological testing of highly gifted children, and she developed above-level testing. She, last night at dinner, Wanda, the woman sitting next to you, said that she did both sides of the spectrum. Who was that? She's on the board, do you remember?
Ann Jameson.
Ann Jameson. Lita Hollingworth started out as the expert on what was then called mental retardation. She wrote the textbook that was used for 2 decades on mental retardation. And it was through that work that she actually discovered giftedness. Not only that, she wrote a book called Special Talents and Defects, which is the very first acknowledgement of choice exceptionality. She discovered giftedness combined with learning disabilities and wrote an entire book on it. She wrote famous books, really famous books, on the highly gifted. Children above 180 IQ has never been equaled. And she was the leader in adolescent psychology. Her textbook, again, was used for 2 decades, a full decade after she was gone. They were still using her adolescent psych book. Now, her counseling psych, I mentioned that she was the first counselor at child-centered therapy and emotional education. How many of you have heard of Carl Rogers. You know something about Rogers' therapy? He was her student. And he based his client-centered therapy on Lita's child-centered therapy. Who would have thought? That I told you about her studies and her book. The book that everybody remembers was never finished by her. She died before it was done, and her husband, Harry Hollingworth, had to finish it for her. But it remains the most comprehensive longitudinal study that has ever been done on profoundly gifted children. Most of what we know about those children are from her book. So this is fascinating. She invented emotional education. Now, we have things today called social emotional learning. You have something in Nebraska like this? What do you call it here?
Well, I mean, yeah, the same.
You call it emotional ed?
Or, I mean, social emotional.
Social
Yeah.
emotional, okay. Well, it was originally emotional education, and it was, of course, devised by Lita. And she has many articles on this that have different issues that she addressed. And I looked at all of them, pulled them all together, and came up with 11 issues. Finding enough hard and interesting work at school, adjusting to classmates, being able to play with other children, not becoming hermits, developing leadership abilities, not becoming negativistic toward authority, learning to suffer fools gladly, and that's the one people remember, avoiding the formation of habits of extreme chicanery, although she did condone benign chicanery, and said that every gifted kid had to learn how to do that. Conforming to rules and expectations, understanding their origin and destiny from an early age, and she was the first person to recognize that being female and gifted presented a different set of issues. So let's look at the highly gifted. She studied their social relations, and she wrote, the more intelligent a person is, regardless of age, the less often can he find a truly congenial companion. True, true, true. And then she talked about 130, it's different in different articles, 130 to 145, or 130 to 150, and in some places 130 to 155, was called the optimal IQ range. Why was that optimal? In one article, she said it's because they're close enough to the average that they share interests and the other kids will choose them as a leader. They're not too far out. In this one, she said it was because they found older playmates who accepted them. So this optimal level was 130 to 145. They tended to share interests accepted by older playmates, and they tend to play with others of like mental age. So if you have an IQ test that generates a mental age, you can pretty much predict the age of the kid's friends. And having older friends was expected then. It wasn't an age lockstep environment in school. Think about the one-room schoolhouse. Age was irrelevant. Think about the friends you made in your neighborhood, especially if you were in a rural area. Age wasn't a factor. You were friends with kids of different ages. And if you were in a multi-age classroom, you gravitated to the older kids and you learned what they did. If you had an older brother or sister, you learned what they did. So it wasn't as lockstep as it is today. And this is the best part. Kids who were smart were automatically pushed up 6 months at a time. They had half-grade acceleration then. So when Terman did his study in 1926, he had teachers nominate kids, and then he asked to test the youngest in the class. And the youngest in the class usually got the highest IQ score in the group. Because it was common to be 1 year accelerated, 18 months accelerated, 2 years accelerated. So you could play. It was possible to find find and play with other kids your mental age. She wrote, many highly gifted children develop habits of solitary play, not because they were unfriendly or gregarious by nature, but rather because their efforts to relate to others were quickly defeated. Other children did not share their interests, vocabulary, or goal orientation. And then these kids above 180, 1 child in 6 related well to other children and had typical play interests. The other 5 were unpopular with children their own age because they always wanted to organize the play into some complicated pattern. Did she know these kids or did she know these kids? With some remote and definite climax as the goal. Which is why you get these kids to play with others their age and they don't connect because they want everything to be more complicated. Her stuff on leadership is gorgeous. If you read nothing else but the last article that she wrote, it's wild. High intelligence is a requisite of leadership. No one has ever advocated stupidity as a qualification for a leader. Go Lita. And these were the qualities, and you're going to be amazed by some of them. They're not things you would have thought of. Integrity, independence, originality, creative imagination, vitality, forcefulness, warmth, poise, stability, audacity, capacity for nonconformity, but look at this one, the love of beauty. In that same article, she wrote that she had never met a gifted person who did not have a love of beauty. That has set me thinking for years. What an unbelievable observation and full of courage. Negativism toward authority. Negativism toward authority tends to develop when the highly gifted child perceives those in authority as illogical, irrational, erroneous, or unjust. It is especially unfortunate, therefore, that so many gifted children have an authority over them, persons who cannot keep or gain the respect of these good thinkers. Now, change suffering fools gladly, if that's stuck in your mind, to suffering foolishness gladly. But what she says about this is so powerful. If there's anything else to write down, it's this line. Gifted persons must learn that others are inherently very different from themselves. That's not what we're teaching these kids. This is one of the most painful and difficult lessons that each gifted child must learn. It is more necessary that this be learned than that any school subject be mastered. Now it even sounds counterintuitive, but I have to tell you, she's absolutely right. What makes every one of you angry at your bosses, at your colleagues who don't work as hard as you do? Why can't they see it? Because if you think we're all alike, you think if you get it, they ought to get it. And you would have much greater compassion if you realize that you're not all alike, and that you are wired differently, and you have greater perceptiveness, and you have a different work ethic, and you have a different sense of integrity. And then if you understood that about yourselves, it wouldn't be such a big deal to put up with people around you that don't get it. Suffering fools gladly. This is the piece. A lot of people took issue with this because they didn't like her calling other people fools. But look at what she really said. The highly intelligent child must learn to suffer fools gladly, not sneeringly, not angrily, not despairingly, not weepingly, but gladly, if personal development is to proceed successfully in the world as it is. I'm sure all of you have heard a child ask these questions. Where did the moon come from? Who made the world? Where did I come from? What will become of me when I die? And the most important gifted question of all, why did I come into this world? Children do not begin to require logically coherent answers to these questions until they reach the mental age of 12 or 13 years of age. The higher the IQ, the earlier the child develops a pressing need for an explanation of the universe. In children who tested above 180 IQ, a desire for a systematic philosophy of life and death developed when they were only 6 or 7. Problems of good and evil plague the gifted at an early age, and they're also interested in an explanation of reproduction at a tender age. That's why she developed her whole program around origins and destinies. And the kids developed their own curriculum called the Evolution of Common Things. It still exists, and Kathy Carney has it. She's another Lita Hollingworth nutcase like me. So this is what she said about gifted girls. The intelligent girl, now remember when she's writing this, this is 1931. Okay? The intelligent girl begins very early to perceive that she is, so to speak, of the wrong sex. From 1,000 tiny cues, she learns that she is not expected to entertain the same ambitions as her brother. Her problem is to adjust to a sense of sex inferiority without losing self-respect and self-determination on the one hand, and without becoming morbidly aggressive on the other. This is never an easy adjustment to achieve, and even superior intelligence does not always suffice to accomplish it. The special problem of gifted girls is that they have strong preferences for activities that are hard to follow on account of their sex, which is inescapable. The research done since then definitely shows that girls, gifted girls, have more interests that are typical of gifted boys. And they want to pursue things that, for centuries, areas were closed to them. And she was also a psychologist, which meant she did IQ testing. How many of you have heard bad things about IQ testing? You can't find gifted kids with IQ testing. Lita would argue with that, and so would I. A leader in the study of exceptionalities, Hollingworth believed that individual intelligence scales are essential in the diagnosis of children who develop atypically in either direction. And she demonstrated IQ testing in her courses with children at both ends of the spectrum. The only way to identify these children with certainty is to apply reliable and valid intelligence tests. Nothing can take the place of such tests in making a census of the gifted. This really blew me away. This is a picture of Lita video of Lita testing, I think. No? Okay. Sorry. Let's see what happens. There it goes. Can't seem to do it with this. That was at Spire School that she created, and there she is. You're the first people to see this. Oh my God. So Julian Stanley, who created the talent searches at the Johns Hopkins University, credits the inspiration for that idea to Lita Hollingworth. This is what he wrote. For 42 years, her work has influenced mine, which has spread all over the world. We're probably into 300,000 kids internationally being tested in the talent searches now, a year, per year. Without her example and procedure, I could not even have started my efforts to help youths who reason exceptionally well in mathematics. Dr. Hollingworth was the co-founder of the gifted movement. She did far more than the other founder, Professor Louis M. Terman, to improve the education of bright youngsters. Her work on behalf of children with extremely high IQs remains almost unique a half-century later. And this is what he said the problem was, which is true. The problem is analogous of that of trying to measure the heights of men with a measuring stick only 5 feet 10 inches long. The solution is similar also. Use a longer measuring instrument, say 7 feet tall. And that's what we do with talent searches. If you don't know about them, the way talent searches work is the child qualifies if they reach a certain percentile on their grade level achievement test, which could be in some talent searches 95%, other talent searches 97%. Julian Stanley at the Johns Hopkins University set it at 97%. Then they took the Scholastic Aptitude Test, which normally is not taken until you're a junior in high school. How he managed to get them to do this on a large scale, I don't know. Lita just did it on an individual scale. And she used the Stanford Binet, and it's organized in age levels. The Binet-type age scale might be considered the original examination suitable for extensive out-of-level testing, which is why we continue to offer it as a supplemental test. So, how it all began, what is the it? This was the beginning of Lita Hollingworth's career in gifted. At the time that this happened, that she describes in Children Above 180 IQ, her career path was totally set. She was the voice of feminism. She was accepted and respected as providing the scientific basis for women getting the right to vote. And all of a sudden, Naomi Norsworthy dies. She's that ed psych professor at Columbia. They asked Lita, the minute she got her PhD, to take Naomi's place. She teaches this course on mental retardation, and something happens that changes all of our lives. This moment. It was in November 1916 that I saw for the first time a child testing above 180 IQ, Stanford Binet. I was teaching a course in the psychology of mentally deficient children, and it seemed to me that my class should, if possible, observe under test conditions one bright child for the sake of contrast. Accordingly, I asked whether any teacher present could nominate a very intelligent pupil for demonstration. That's what happened. That's how our field started. I did not at that time have any expert knowledge of highly intelligent children. I have been working for some years in the hospitals of New York City with persons presented for commitment to reformatories, prisons, and institutions for mental defectives. This thoroughgoing experience of the negative aspects of intelligence rendered the performance of Eve even more impressive to me than it would otherwise have been. I perceived the clear and flawless working of his mind against a contrasting background of thousands of dull and foolish minds. It was an unforgettable observation. Have any of you ever found a kid whose abilities so blew you away, the questions they asked, the way their minds worked, that you just fell in love with the gifted from that moment on? That's what happened to her. Testing child E. E passed all the 12-year tests with facility and ease, giving responses of excellent quality. He also earned 12 months credit at the top of the test. Thus, even though not yet 8.5 years old, E found this wide-ranging intelligence test fairly easy, even at the top. It did not have enough ceiling for him, so the IQ of 187 is almost certainly an underestimate. In the spring of 1920, he took the Thorndike mental test for freshmen for entrance to Columbia College. An official letter from the director of admissions at Columbia College states that in the freshman test, he was number 2 out of 483 entering Columbia College. He was at this time 12 years, 0 months. That was it. From that moment on, she created our field. That was the catalyst for who she became. In addition to above-level testing, Hollingworth introduced many curricular modifications that are still used in gifted programs, such as the study of biography, which she did herself, compressing curriculum, which is curriculum compacting, reduction of drills, student-created curriculum, thematic units, interdisciplinary education, seminars, focus on creativity, social-emotional education, as well as incredible innovations in regular education. Now, I'm going to go through the rest of these really fast because we're out of time, but you are not going to when she was doing all this. Lita Hollingworth is the one who gave us movable desks, physical education, art and music appreciation, health and nutrition, modern languages, general science, handicrafts, moving beyond the classroom into field trips. All of those general education ideas had to start somewhere. Guess where they started? And then gifted education, achievement as a function of opportunity instead of just a birthright, the importance of nurturing giftedness, the importance of early identification, multiple criteria. Even though she gave IQ tests, she developed multiple criteria. Above-level assessment, child-centeredness, social-emotional education grounded in the psychology of giftedness, recognition of and provision for asynchrony, multicultural perspectives. She was a fabulous humanitarian. She insisted from the outset that the Spire School program accurately represent the diverse racial and ethnic groups in 1930s New York City. Just like Anna Marie was the first to integrate the Roper School, first private school to have integration. This demand met with a great deal of opposition, both from the Board of Education and the Dean and her colleagues at Teachers College. Hollingworth prevailed, and 2 multicultural classes were deliberately created for the first time in the field of gifted education. She taught the students in her gifted program to respect and honor each other without regard to ethnicity or race. More, that's only the beginning of what she gave us. Individualized curriculum, adapting the school to the individual needs of the child, combining acceleration and enrichment, providing opportunities for the gifted to engage educationally with true peers, thematic learning, interdisciplinary education, reduction of the drill in the curriculum, focusing on children's strength, and the study of biography, which she said was particularly important for the highly gifted. And here's another video clip of her actually teaching that biography course at the Spire School. And if you can remember what education looked like, how these kids are interacting is amazing. This is what you might see today, but now
standing up.
you've seen that in a classroom. Desks bolted down, the teacher talking, and the kids reciting. Recitation was what school was all about. Look at this in contrast to recitation to bolted down desks. This was her legacy to education, folks, and to all of us. And no one has seen this before. And there's more coming that he hasn't got digitized yet. Look at how those kids are engaged. Education for leadership, education for creativity, independent and small group projects according to student interests, student-generated curriculum, seminars. Students didn't have discussions then. They just listened and recited. Emotional education, use of technology. She brought typewriters and movie cameras into the classroom. The teacher is a scientist practitioner. The importance of objective observation, and this is my absolute favorite, which we must do. We've got to find this material, we've got to find it and do it. Listen to this. Wouldn't you have loved someone to teach you how to argue with yourself? And to do it logically? Oh my God. She said, these kids are going to argue anyway. Teach them how to do it right. Training in forensics was a part of the curriculum, covering the whole area of argument, argument with oneself, involving logic and the psychology of thinking, argument with others in private involving etiquette and the art of polite disagreement, argument in public involving parliamentary law, the rules of order, the nature of evidence, and the art of persuasion of crowds so that they don't kill you. She felt that that was essential. So she developed these 2 programs at different times. The first one was 2 classes, a moderately gifted class from 135 to 155, and then a highly gifted class from 155 up. And then the Spire School is the most famous of the programs for the highly gifted that she was known for. And of course, she dealt with elitism, which all of us are doing. Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm making you late. Can you give me just a few more minutes to finish? Sure. Okay, I'll do this fast. How many of you have had elitism to worry about? Obviously she did too. Look at what she was creating in that world. She said, work with competitors of one's own caliber tends to starve conceit rather than feed it. Observers have recorded that a pupil coming into special classes often meets a successful rival for the first time. If he remains in the special class, he is likely to leave it far less conceited than when he entered it. Many of our pupils had their first experience of being equaled or surpassed when they entered the special class. Several interesting episodes arose to suggest that conceit was corrected rather than fostered by the experience of daily contact with a large number of pupils. No child was found who could not endure this experience, but a few parents were unable to withstand the humiliation of having their child reduced from the head of the class and withdrew the children to the regular classes again where they could continue unrivaled. So we don't have time to go into the structure of the school, but the Games Club is so fascinating. She felt that Games Club, which was one afternoon a week, would enable these kids to keep from being isolated. And so she had games like chess and checkers, and that kids could play this with mental peers, even if they were all different ages, including adults. And that it was essential to teach these kids how to use their leisure time. There have been several follow-up studies, Willard White's being perhaps the one. He has a book coming out on this. And those students who were in this program 50 years later said what they learned was social, emotional belonging, and they maintained the friendships that they developed in that class. Continuing interest in art, music, culture, language, and leadership, and research skills and continued development of interest-based passions. So she was also, and I'll talk about this in my keynote, she was considered the scientific bulwark of the women's movement, and her studies on women's intelligence gave women the right to vote. That seems to be enough to pay attention to. But these are the kinds of things that she did when she was just a youngster, when she was just starting college. Her master's degree was on women being capable of work during their menstrual cycles. You talk about a tough broad. Wow. She disproved the variability hypothesis, which I can tell you more about at lunch. She challenged the maternal instinct. Are you kidding me? And the conviction that a woman's place was in the home, and she discussed the plight of gifted women, which this I think you need to hear. Stated briefly, the woman question is how to reproduce the species and at the same time to work and realize work's full reward in accordance with individual ability. This is a question primarily of the gifted, for the discontent with and resentment against women's work have originated chiefly among women well endowed with intellect. She discovered the gifted woman. And this is the last of the slides, and it's just 3 of them. We know that we can select in childhood those endowed with at least one indispensable quality of leadership, extraordinary intelligence. We know that endowment of intellect is a permanent one. We know that the range of intellect among school children is simply enormous, and that this will still be the case when these children become adults. All of this knowledge has been gleaned since 1900, and it is a goodly amount. It is enough to modify education radically if it becomes generally disseminated and accepted. These facts will be epoch-making if applied to the limit of their power to apply. And I want a calligraphy on my wall of this last part. For a long time, people will not believe them, will be afraid of them, will not know what to do about them. But in the end, the truth will be admitted and utilized, as everything is finally utilized that has power to bring order to human life. And this is in that letter that she wrote to the Lincoln Star and Journal. All my early memories are of the Sod House frontier, where I acquired a splendid set of work habits. Sometime I shall come back to Nebraska for good. I was born there. I was reared there. I shall take the last long sleep there. David, she wrote this 2 years before she died. Thank you for sharing this. And thank you for staying late. I know I interrupted you.